I've had my dog Ruger since he was 8 weeks old. He's a 4-year-old black lab mix, and if you know labs, you know they are not exactly what you'd call a guard dog. Ruger's general approach to strangers is to run at them at full speed and attempt to sit in their lap. He has never once in his life growled at a person. He's the most reliably cheerful animal I've ever owned. And I say that as someone who grew up with dogs. I tell you all of this because what happened this past November doesn't make sense without you understanding what kind of dog he normally is. I live in a small house on a dead-end street in a mid-sized city in western Michigan. Not rural, not suburban, genuinely urban. Old houses packed close together, chain-link fences, neighbors who know your business. I bought the place 2 years ago, and it's the kind of neighborhood where you recognize the cars that belong and notice the ones that don't. My neighbor on the left is an older woman named Helen. On the right is a younger couple, Marcus and Bree, who I like a lot. We look out for each other. It's a normal street. I'm not setting a creepy scene here. I genuinely like where I live. The storm came in on a Thursday. I remember because I'd just gotten home from a work happy hour and I was more tired than drunk, and all I wanted was to order food and watch something dumb on TV. The weather had been building all day. By 9 p.m., the thunder was constant and the rain was coming sideways past my windows. I let Ruger out in the backyard just long enough for him to do his business. He came back in soaked and delighted, and we settled in on the couch together. Somewhere around 10:30, Ruger lifted his head. He does this sometimes. Hears a squirrel or another dog outside and goes on alert for a second. Normal dog behavior. I didn't think anything of it, but he didn't put his head back down. He sat up slowly and stared at the front door. His ears were forward. His whole body was tense. I watched him for maybe 30 seconds, waiting for him to relax, and he didn't. He just kept staring at that door. Then he whimpered. In 4 years, I have heard Ruger whimper exactly twice, once when he cut his paw on broken glass, and once at the vet when he got a vaccine. He is not a dog that makes that sound. I got up and looked out the front window. Just the street, the rain, the parked cars I recognized, nothing there. I checked the back window. Yard was empty. I told Ruger it was nothing, he was being weird, and after about 5 more minutes, he settled back down and we finished the episode we were watching. I didn't think about it again until the next storm. That one came the following Monday night. Bigger, meaner, the kind with a lot of lightning. I'm not afraid of thunderstorms. I actually kind of like them. I was in bed by 10, reading with the lamp on, and Ruger curled at the foot of the mattress, which he's technically not supposed to do, but which I've never actually enforced. He was completely relaxed. I was almost asleep. The lightning was doing that thing where it strobes over and over through the window. At 11:43, I heard something outside. It was subtle. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. A soft scraping sound against the side of the house. Once. Like something dragging against the exterior siding. I assumed it was a branch. We have a big oak in the front yard with branches that hang out over the porch, and they do sometimes scrape against the house in heavy wind. I noted it, kept reading. Ruger was standing at the foot of the bed. Not in the curled up position he'd been in 2 minutes before. Standing, stiff, his eyes on the bedroom window. And then he started to growl. Low, constant, from deep in his chest. I have never heard that sound come out of him before. I sat up in bed and felt every hair on my arms stand up, not because of the sound outside, but because of him. Because I knew that dog, and whatever he was responding to, it was real to him. I turned off the lamp. I don't know why I did that first, some instinct. I moved to the window and looked out. There was a figure standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, across the street slightly. Hooded jacket, hands in pockets, just standing there in the pouring rain, facing my house, completely still. I watched for at least a full minute. They didn't move. I couldn't make out any features in the dark and the rain, just the shape, the stillness. The fact that they were standing there at 11:45 on a Monday night in a thunderstorm looking at my house. I called 911 this time, not the non-emergency line. I kept my lamp off while I talked to them. By the time a patrol car came by about 11 minutes later, the figure was gone. The officer walked the block, checked the alley behind my house, and told me he didn't see anyone. He was thorough and professional. He wrote up a report and told me to call back if I saw the person again. What I didn't tell him, because it felt insane, was this. The next morning, I found a single wet boot print on my front porch, right in front of the door, like someone had stood there on the porch while I was on the phone with the dispatcher. Facing the door, I changed my deadbolt that week. I got a Ring camera for the porch. I haven't seen the figure again, and Ruger's been fine, back to his usual goofy self, trying to sit on guests, stealing socks. But here's the thing I keep turning over. That print was on the porch after I'd already called the police, which means whoever it was knew I'd seen them. And they came to the door anyway. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know if it was the same person both times or someone different. The police looked into it and didn't find anything that led anywhere. I still sleep with my phone on the nightstand and the lamp in easy reach, which is new for me. And I notice now every storm, whether Ruger lifts his head, so far, he's stayed asleep. I'm grateful for that. But I'm also watching. I grew up on a working farm in rural Indiana, and when you grow up like that, you learn pretty fast that most things that go bump in the night have an explanation. Raccoons in the grain bins, a loose sheet of corrugated steel flapping in the wind, a sick calf moving around. My dad used to say that the scariest things on a farm are the things you can actually see. Broken equipment, bad harvests, debt, not things that go unseen. I carried that with me my whole life. I was 26 that summer, house sitting for my Uncle Dale while he and my aunt drove their RV out to see my cousin's new place in Colorado. I'd done it before. I knew the property. 40-some acres of flat Indiana farmland, a century-old farmhouse, a machine shed, and an old red barn that hadn't housed animals in years. I was only there for 11 days. I figured I'd feed the cats, check on the property after storms, watch some TV, and collect a free place to stay for a week and a half. Win-win. The storm came in on the third night, the kind that the Midwest does better than anywhere else in the country. The radar looked like a solid green wall moving east, and by 9 p.m. the thunder was rattling the windows. I wasn't worried. The house was solid, I had flashlights, and I'd ridden out plenty worse. I made soup, watched half a movie, and fell asleep on the couch sometime around 11:15. I remember checking my phone right before I closed my eyes. Normal night. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. The power was out. That was the first thing I registered. No hum from the refrigerator, no little green standby light from the TV. The storm was still going, not as violent as before, but still steady. Rain against the windows, distant rumbling. I lay there for a minute, just orienting myself, and then I heard it. A knock, slow, heavy, deliberate. 3 times, coming from outside, from the direction of the barn. My first thought was the barn door. The big rolling door on the south side had a latch that wasn't always reliable, and if the wind caught it right, it could knock against the frame when it opened. I'd actually noticed it was a little loose when I'd done a walkthrough earlier that week. That was almost certainly it. Wind pushing the door banging against the frame. 3 times meant a strong gust, not a person. I went back to sleep. At 3:14 a.m. I was awake again. The knocking was back, but it wasn't 3 times now. It was slow, rhythmic, evenly spaced. 1 knock every 2 or 3 seconds, steady as a metronome. The wind doesn't knock like a metronome. I sat up on the couch and listened for about 30 seconds, counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, pause. Then it started again from 1. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the kitchen window that faces the barn. I couldn't see much. The rain was still coming down. The yard was dark. The flashlight beam didn't reach far. The barn door was closed. The latch appeared to be in place. I couldn't see anything moving around the perimeter of the building. The knocking had stopped while I was standing there looking. I told myself it was the storm doing something weird with acoustics, went back to the couch, and didn't sleep well for the rest of the night. In the morning, the storm had cleared out and left everything soaked and glittery the way it does. I walked out to the barn just to check, feeling a little embarrassed about how spooked I'd gotten. The latch was fine. The door didn't budge when I tugged it. I walked around all 4 sides of the building and didn't find anything. No branches that could have been banging against the siding, no loose equipment, nothing. The mud around the base of the south wall was churned up a little, but I figured that was just run. I went back inside and forgot about it. The second storm hit on day 7. I know that because I'd been keeping a little mental tally of how many days I had left. 4 more days and I could go back to my apartment and my own bed and not have to feed 6 barn cats every morning. The storm that night was actually worse than the first one. Tornado warning for the county, the whole thing. I was in the basement for a couple of hours. When the warning lifted, I came back upstairs around midnight and did a quick check of the property from the windows. Everything looked fine. I was in bed this time, not the couch, and I had my phone with me. At 1:52 a.m., I heard the knocking again, except this time it wasn't coming from the direction of the barn. It was coming from the side of the house, specifically from the wall just outside the bedroom I was sleeping in. Not frantic, not angry, just slow, deliberate knocking. Patient, like someone who had all the time in the world and knew you could hear them. I lay completely still with my phone in my hand for I don't know how long. The knocking stopped and then started again. Stopped and started. I called the non-emergency sheriff's line because I genuinely didn't know what else to do, and I felt ridiculous doing it. And I told them what I was hearing. The dispatcher was kind about it. She said she'd send someone to do a drive-by when a unit was available, probably 45 minutes to an hour. I sat with my back against the headboard and my flashlight in my hand, and I waited. The knocking stopped for good around 2:10 a.m. The deputy showed up at 2:58 a.m., walked the property with a real flashlight, and came back to tell me there was nothing outside, no signs of anyone. He was polite, but I could tell he thought I was some city kid who got spooked by the storm. I thanked him and locked the door behind him and didn't sleep at all after that. Here's the part I keep coming back to. The next morning, in the daylight, I walked the perimeter of the house. On the east side, right outside the bedroom window, there were 2 partial boot prints in the mud. Large ones. Pressed in deep, like someone had been standing there for a long time, not just passing through. I took photos and sent them to my uncle. He said it was probably just his own prints from when he did yard work. He said they could have been there for days. Maybe. I don't know. What I do know is that when I went back to check the old barn one more time before I left, I found the south door unlatched, hanging slightly open. I was the only one with a key to the property. I had not been in that barn the entire time I was there. I still can't explain the boot prints. I can't explain how that latch got opened. I stayed the remaining 2 days at a motel in town and told my uncle the power had been out too long for me to be comfortable there. He didn't argue. I think about those boot prints sometimes. How deep they were sunk, how close they were to the wall, like whatever left them was pressing up against the house. Listening back. This is going to sound like the kind of story someone makes up to post online, and I genuinely cannot help that. My sister told me to write it down, so I'm writing it down. Take it for what it's worth. I do trail maintenance as a volunteer for a state forest in the northern part of Lower Michigan. I've been doing it for about 6 years. It's mostly clearing deadfall, resetting trail markers, checking erosion damage after big rains, logging what needs reporting to the actual Park Service staff. Unglamorous work, but I like being out in the woods and I like feeling useful. My usual partner for these weekend trips is a guy named Terry, retired mid-60s, former Army, absolutely no patience for anything that isn't grounded in observable reality. Terry is the opposite of a storyteller. He once told me that he'd stopped watching horror movies in his 30s because he found them boring. I tell you this because Terry is the other witness to what I'm about to describe. We were doing a 2-day check on the eastern section of the trail system, a roughly 12-mile stretch that runs through some of the more remote terrain in the forest. Steep ravines, old-growth sections, one creek crossing that washes out every few years. We were camping on Saturday night at a designated site near the midpoint of the section. The plan was to finish the second half Sunday morning and be out by noon. Normal trip. We'd done it probably 4 or 5 times before. The storm rolled in late Saturday afternoon while we were still working, faster than forecasted. We got the tent up and gear secured before it hit full force, made dinner under the rainfly, and were in our sleeping bags by 8. I was reading on my phone. Terry fell asleep immediately, the way veterans seem to be able to do anywhere. By 9:30, the storm was loud, real lightning and thunder intensity, heavy rain hammering the tent. I wasn't nervous, just awake. At 10:15, I heard music. I'm going to say that again. I heard music. Coming from somewhere down in the ravine below the campsite, through the storm, through the trees. Faint but distinct. Tinny, like it was coming through a small speaker or an old transistor radio. I couldn't make out what was playing, just that it was music and it was rhythmic and it was coming from somewhere in the dark below us. I sat up and listened and told myself there had to be another camper down there. Maybe someone at an unofficial site. Not uncommon in that forest, people bush camp all the time. I noted it and went back to trying to sleep. The music was still there when I woke up at 12:50 a.m. I shook Terry's shoulder. He came awake quietly, the way he always does. I told him to listen. He lay still for about 20 seconds and then sat up and said, "What is that?" in a tone of voice I'd never heard from him before. Not afraid, just very flat and precise, the way someone sounds when they're concentrating hard. I said I thought it was another camper. He listened for another minute and then said there was no designated site in that ravine and the terrain was too steep for an unofficial site. He'd done more of this section than I had, like years longer, and he knew the topography. We decided to wait until morning. I won't pretend I slept after that. The music stopped sometime before 3 a.m. I know because I was still awake at 2:41 and it was gone by then. Terry was quiet and I didn't ask him if he was sleeping. In the morning, before we broke camp, he said he wanted to check the ravine before we moved on. I should have pushed back on this. I know that now. I went with him anyway, which is the dumb decision I'll own. The ravine was steep enough that we had to go sideways and use the trees for support. It had stopped raining, but everything was soaked. We went down about 40 feet to where the terrain flattened out near the creek. The creek was running high from the storm. And there, sitting on a flat rock at the creek's edge, was a bull radio. A small battery-powered AM/FM radio, orange plastic casing, the dial still turned to a station. The battery compartment was intact. It wasn't wrapped in plastic, wasn't inside any bag, just sitting on the rock like someone had set it there. There were no footprints in the muddy creek bank that we could identify as fresh. No gear, no campfire remains, no trash, no sign of any person having been there recently. Just the radio. We stood there for a while without saying anything. Then Terry picked up the radio, turned it over, looked at it, and set it back down. He said, "Let's go," and we went back up the ravine. He didn't say anything else about it until we were almost back to the trailhead, and then he said, "I don't know what that was," and he said it in a way that made clear he didn't want to keep talking about it, so we didn't. I reported to the ranger station at the end of the trip. They noted it and said they'd check it out. I followed up 2 weeks later and was told they hadn't found anything unusual during their trail check. I don't know if they actually went down to the creek or not. I've thought about the rational explanations. Someone went down there before the storm, left the radio, got out before we arrived. The music was just carrying from somewhere else, and I misjudged the direction. The radio had been there for days, and the rain had washed away any trace of who left it. All of those are possible. I've run through all of them. None of them account for the timing, for it playing at midnight in the middle of a storm and stopping before 3 a.m., for there being no trail to or from it in fresh mud, for there being no person we ever saw or heard. Terry hasn't mentioned it again. When I brought it up about a month after, he just said, "Yeah, that was strange," and changed the subject. Coming from him, that was the most unsettling part. I've done 3 more trips into that section since, always with someone else, and I always camp further from that ravine than I need to. I never hear anything anymore. I do still listen, though. Every time the storm comes in and the rain gets loud, I listen.